Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, March 31st, 2026, and today we're asking if agriculture was the biggest mistake in history. That's a normal farming podcast topic. We're taking a question about switching to a greenhouse from in the house and the mighty useful auger bit. So let's do it. All right, everyone, welcome to Till Tuesday, your weekly reminder that you can get living soil compost and potting mixes from the bona fide nerds over there at Till Soil. Check out Nathan on the Composter Podcast, Season 4, Episode 3, or head to tillsoil.com to learn more. I hope your weeks are off to a good start. I got the tunnel tomatoes in yesterday, which is about right on time for us, and will come in handy for the third segment today. The rice that I started last Friday is slowly germinating, which is quite exciting. What's the goal with the rice? Well, I don't really know. I kind of know. I'd like to grow and eat a bowl of our own rice. That sounds fun. But having done the vegetable farming thing for like roughly 17 years now, I'm not bored with it exactly, but I'm definitely looking for new things to explore in agriculture that I haven't done yet, just to keep it fresh and interesting, which is not hard to do given the overwhelming possibility of soil. It's always something new to grow or do. So hence the focus on more perennial crops and maybe a little grain dabbling, but that's a good topic, or at least related segue into the next topic. First, though, don't forget to get your 20-second farm video clips to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Love seeing those. All right, so a few weeks back, I read an article by historian Jared Diamond, whom you may know from his work, Guns, Germs, and Steel, or his other well-known book called Collapse. But Diamond is a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, scientist, historian. And anyway, the article I read by him was actually not very recent. It was from 1987. I think I would have been like 5. And it was called The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race. Very subtle. I'll link it in the show notes. And spoiler alert here, the mistake that in Jared's story is indeed agriculture. Diamond writes, quote, "Archaeology is demolishing another sacred belief that human history over the past million years has been a long tale of progress. In particular, recent discoveries suggest that the adoption of agriculture, supposedly our most decisive step towards a better life, was in many ways a catastrophe from which we have never recovered. With agriculture came the gross social and sexual inequality, the disease and despotism that curse our existence," end quote. All right, so there's a lot to unpack there, but the argument he makes in this article is essentially that life before we settled down and started cultivating crops like rice was substantially better, healthier, funner, more equal, less work, better. To the point about health, Diamond, among others, argue that when we settled down and started growing crops, the number of crop species we were eating dropped. Also, with a dependence on just a few crops, the risk of starvation from crop failure increased. Indeed, the idea being that hunter-gatherer societies were less at risk of starvation than agricultural societies because food was abundant if you knew where to look. Plus, all the fields rich with wild foods weren't plowed and filled with one crop. And of course, staying put, especially with booming populations from the new abundance of calories, led to disease. Not to mention, agriculture is freaking hard, way harder than hunting and gathering, especially when hunting and gathering, quote unquote, is also accompanied by what I like to call like encouraging, meaning that so-called hunter-gatherers also engaged in a sort of proto-agriculture by encouraging certain useful plants to produce more than they normally would. That last part is me adding on to what Diamond wrote, but I think it's an important element to emphasize when talking about hunter-gatherer groups. They were not just like, dudes, check this out, I found some fruit over here. They knew the land immensely well and did things like the use of fire or coppicing, etc., to ensure that certain useful plants were successful and abundant. Anyway, Diamond also writes, quote, "Besides malnutrition, starvation, and epidemic diseases, farming helped bring another curse upon humanity, deep class division. Hunter-gatherers have little or no stored food and no concentrated food sources like an orchard or a herd of cows. They live off the wild plants and animals they obtain each day. Therefore, there can be no kings, no class of social parasites who grow fat on food seized from others," which basically is just like a description of the world right now. Anyway, Diamond goes on, "Freed from the need to transport their babies during a nomadic existence and under pressure to produce more hands to till the field, farming women tended to have more frequent pregnancies than their hunter-gatherer counterparts, with consequent drains on their health," end quote. And this essay, probably because it was in 1987, doesn't even delve into the effects agriculture has had on the environment. So yeah, there is a lot we don't know about those sort of pre-agrarian societies, but he's not the only one to make that argument. And certainly more researchers have since that, well, we may have goofed royally when we started farming. So what does that mean for us today, where we obviously are not going to just return to a life of hunting and gathering with so many dang Walmarts and cities in the way? First, I believe there are many ways to do things. Take the pre-colonial indigenous Americans. They adopted corn production among other crops, often literally among other crops, but still managed to keep the production ecological and polycultural, their diets relatively diverse, their societies relatively equal, and their workload manageable, though I should say that pre-colonial societies who relied more heavily on agriculture tended to be more warlike, even have larger populations and potentially more disease and nutrient deficiencies than their coastal neighbors who relied on a mix of like agriculture and hunting, fishing, gathering, and that stuff more equally, as opposed to just relying more on corn and squash, etc. So anyway, there are some lessons there in terms of growing diversely, eating diversely, living diverse lives in semi-agrarian societies. We have improved as an agrarian society in the sense that people live longer and healthier lives than earlier agrarians did. Although, to be sure, it's also pretty costly environmentally, and we're not having to battle our neighbors all the time. I mean, not literally with like stones and stuff to keep our land, but science and technology plays a big role in that as well. And simple hand washing, that was a really good call in terms of like disease. Anyway, this is something I've talked about in other segments to some extent before, but I thought Diamond's essay, which is not super long and worth the read, was a good one, and it aged well. And I thought it would be fun to share it with you all and get your all's thoughts on this idea. Did we go wrong when we went agrarian? Let me know what you all think and what fixing it would look like given the world's land ownership capitalism model. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, switching from indoor to outdoor seedling production. Now that's a segue if ever there was one. What to expect? BRB.
Hey everybody, Jen and Jay, Baraboo, Wisconsin, Zone 6A. Thought we would share our compost process. We shred cardboard from our retail business, get grounds for gardens, and layer that with our food scraps. And so far this season, we've gotten about 6 yards of compost.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything, custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Thomas, who writes, quote, "Do you have any advice for someone looking to switch from starting indoors under lights to a cold frame made of glass windows or low hoop tunnel thinget? Any proverbial potholes, monkey wrenches, or common first-timer mistakes to watch out for? Is it safe to assume a heat mat is a good investment?" It's all the same question. I'm just nervous. Here's to a better 2026, end quote. All right, great question here, Thomas. So yes, I have some thoughts on what to avoid when first starting out with a little greenhouse-y sort of structure. First, Hannah and I, when we originally set off on our own farm, built two small cold frames that were kind of like set on the ground that we started all of our first garden starts inside of, and it worked weirdly well, really, with some small considerations. First, we used old glass windows, and the paint had a bad habit of falling into the transplants, which was not ideal. So there's that. Second, there were holes on the side where mice could get in and create a few, problems that we solved, of course, with mouse traps and fixing the holes. Also, the bending over was a lot. Like, it's on the ground, so that's a lot of bending over. When we finally moved to a greenhouse, I was quite thankful to just have some tables on which to set things, like a heat mat, which, yes, if you have electricity, is a good investment. So if you are going to build a small, like cold frame of some sort, consider how well it's sealed and how well you can ventilate it. Look for some models online for how to do the ventilation part the best. Also, whether you use an old door or old windows or build your own plastic door, make sure it's easy to open and close and that it is sturdy, because stuff may stand on it. Wind is going to, peck away at your structures all the time, no matter what they are. Make sure to secure them. I also think if you can get the dang thing off the ground in some way, your back is going to thank you a lot. For instance, I like that design from the other week. I think it was probably about a month ago now, from Colin in Utah via their 20-second farm video clip that was sent to Farmer Mike at no-tillgrowers.com, was off the ground at a reasonable height. So, a working height. It's good. You will appreciate that when you're older. One other thing I loved about our little cold frames as a starting point, though, is that it was easy to protect them from the cold. We just could throw some, like blankets over top on really cold nights, and that was super effective. There is even a world where you flip those to be growing cold frames for the fall and the winter production, and not just like seed starting cold frames, and then right back to using them from seed starts like in the spring, which would be a really cool option. Look at the Parisian market gardeners. They did a lot of that sort of thing. As for greenhouses, don't go too cheap. I'd rather have a cold frame than a greenhouse constructed out of PVC or one of those like stand-up kits that you get at the box store. Not saying they won't work, not judging. I just worry about the longevity and reliability of something like those over the course of an entire season, especially in windy scenarios. For me, I would recommend just touching base with a high tunnel supplier if you want to level up to a small tunnel whenever you're ready to do that. And that way it's secure, it's covered, it's safe. You could even insure it. A Farmer's Friend cat tunnel also does the trick nicely, especially if you can get some wind bracing there. Also, if you're piecing things together, you need UV treated plastic. People sometimes think that any clear plastic that you can get at whatever Lowe's or whatever will work. It will not. Non-UV treated plastic will disintegrate in the sun. So 6 mil UV treated greenhouse poly is preferred for greenhouses if you were going to build a small one just like out of stuff. I also do like starting with card tables to avoid the rodent issues. They cannot easily climb upon the metal legs, so that's helpful. And I think that's about it. Listeners and viewers, you can let us know your thoughts and what you've done that's worked and what hasn't. What has your transition been like going from indoor to outdoor? Otherwise, I think that's it for the tunnel stuff. Let's talk about the wild world of auger bits, which I promise is more interesting than it sounds. Well, maybe promise is a strong word, but it is. I promise, sort of. Anyway, be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show. All right, so every Tuesday I like to round it out with a segment on tools, and this week's tool is going to be the mighty auger bit. Now, what is an auger and why dedicate a segment to it? So an auger is essentially a corkscrew-like device that digs a hole. If you were putting in a lot of fencing, for instance, you might rent a gas-powered auger or hire, someone to come with an auger machine and dig the holes for you, because if you've ever, dug fence post holes by hand, you know that a few are doable, but hundreds are deathable. Sorry, I'm dad. Can't help it. It's just brutal on the arms, the back, the shoulders, and it's slow as all get out. The auger, or in this case, the auger bit, speeds the process up and takes the strain off the body, as a good machine is wont to do. But the same thing can be said, about planting hundreds of tomato plants. A handful is easy enough with a shovel or a post hole digger, but a few hundred will absolutely brutalize the body, especially if you are also having to do a few hundred peppers and eggplant and all that stuff. Plus, you take a fair amount of time to, accomplish that task. So enter the auger bit. Now, the auger bit is a giant drill bit that turns a relatively ordinary drill into a portable low-duty auger. Low-duty, emphasis there on low-duty. The drill needs to be a brushless drill, and if it's cordless, like it probably will be being used in a field, be a lot of cords, it needs to be at least 18 volts, but 20 volts is generally better with like a 5 amp hour battery if you can get it. Now, if you have a tilter or a quick cut greens harvester, you probably already have a similar setup to that, because anything too small in the auger bit or the tilter will burn up your drill. Also worth noting is that your drill bits on the electric drill cannot dig your fence posts like into raw ground. They can dig your holes about 8 inches deep into relatively workable soil with no, heavy residue or hard pan. So, established garden beds essentially. But if you have cover crops or heavy clay, it's going to be hard to get that auger bit to be functional with just like a regular drill. These bits come in many shapes and sizes. The one that we use for tomatoes is a 4-inch diameter by 30-inch long one, I think. So it's like 10 centimeters diameter by 75 centimeters tall. I can't find the exact one that I bought online because it was like, I don't know, a decade ago, but I see like Lowe's and Home Depot sell similar ones that would probably work. The smaller the diameter, the easier it will be to get into rougher soil. So for instance, planting bulbs into dense clay soil, it may work fine with 2 or 3 inch auger bits that are also on the market. That would be like 5 to 8 centimeters. Now the bigger auger bits can be a little harder on the wrists if you're dealing with heavy clays. So you may want to purchase a drill handle to hold it with your left hand while you squeeze it with your right, or hold it with your right hand while you squeeze the trigger with your left. And that will just stabilize it for you a little bit. So is it worth it? Well, if you don't already have, the right drill, you're looking at around $40 to $100 for the larger bit, give or take, unless you can find one at eBay or something. So if you also have to buy the drill, that could be a lot of money, and it would be hard to justify for a small farm. But if you're doing like 300-ish tomato plants per planting, then it could come in handy because it will last forever, especially if you already have the drill. Our 4-inch auger bit is around 10 years old and ain't slowing down anytime soon. And those smaller bulb planters can work too. I would just look for those that would be tall enough to use standing up, because some they sell are not very tall, and there's really no point in an auger bit that you have to use from your knees. In that case, a trowel is probably a lot cheaper. Yesterday, when I was planting our tomatoes, I laid out the measuring tape just off center, then went every 2 feet to dig a hole with the bit. Since the soil is in our tunnel there is pretty loose at this point, it slips right in and out pretty easily. Then I could just, throw some compost in the hole like I always do, then the plant, and then I just covered it like normal. But more on the tomatoes as the season goes on. What I like about the auger bit is that it's just a really precise amount of disturbance. Just makes a hole that you're going to fill with a plant pretty fast. So it won't work in every soil, especially hard pans, but I do love it for a quick tomato or pepper planting. Anyway, that's the gist. It's a good tool, but whether or not it belongs in your toolbox will depend a lot on what you grow and how much. Let me know your thoughts or questions. Otherwise, I think that's it for this tool segment on Till Tuesday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Also, there's like a thing on the side here somewhere. I think maybe this side, I don't know. That if you want to kick in a few bucks that way, that is super helpful. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to the great Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Always super thankful for her help. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. And a couple people that bumped up while my voice was not well last month. So you all are amazing. Mark Hare and Bill Price. And then one I may have forgotten, Cynthia Johnson, from the end of February, because I haven't really done any in March. So shouts to all of you. Really massively appreciate the support. And I reward you weirdly with a story that I make up. Anyway, this week's story, as you will remember, is about Junie, who has just decided to shake up her life and move to the mountains and get away from all the, like divorce and all the weird things that was happening. And anyway, when she gets there, she settles in. She loves her little apartment. She's like right downtown. And anyway, she sees something strange out the window. There is a person walking down the street looking, somewhat normal, but it's the way they're walking that sort of catches her attention, because it's not really walking. They're like dancing. Like, it's hard to describe, but just sort of bobbing up and down dancing, kind of like, back and forth, and, got a little rhythm to it. And it's kind of fun. She's like, that seems pretty fun. And she smiles. She's like, oh, this is definitely my kind of place. And then she notices another person's, same sort of thing. So dancing, but in a slightly different way, like, I don't know, this person's maybe not got as much rhythm, but, slightly more enthusiastically. And like I said, at first she's like, this is awesome. Like, people are fun here. This is going to be great. But as those people who are walking down the street dancing get a little bit closer, Junie notices they look exhausted. It's like the happiest dance performed by the unhappiest people. What in the world is happening, she thinks. Well, that is for Thursday, actually. I always find it's like a little weird to do stories on Wednesdays when people don't really follow the show or are interviewed. Anyway, we'll save it for Thursday. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you tomorrow. It'll be awesome. Obviously, I tipped off what we've got going on, but you'll love it.